Our conversation is with Mr. Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. Mr. Bezmenov was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. I think you're trying to tell us something in this country.
I'm trying to tell you that it has to be stopped unless you want to end up in Gulag system and enjoy all the advantages of socialist equality. Working for free, catching fleas on your body, sleeping on planks of plywood in Alaska this time, I guess. In Alaska this time, I guess. That's where Americans will belong, unless they will wake up, of course, and force their government to stop aiding Soviet fascism.
Welcome to the McElhaney Report. I'm Bill McElhaney. Each show we cover a crucial issue of the day, but always from a viewpoint or perspective rarely, if ever, aired by the mass media. We hope you'll find it interesting. This is perhaps the most important interview we've ever conducted. Since 1989, we've been told constantly by the mass media and the government about the so-called death of communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellite nations. We are told that the new Russian rulers are democratic and opening up to political and economic freedom. The Bush and Clinton administrations have proposed even greater aid from U.S. taxpayers to the rulers of what is called the new Russia and the new Eastern European states. They tell us that we must aid and be partners with these rulers and join with them in a new world order. Our guest today can refute this conventional wisdom. He is one of two outstanding experts in the free world on this subject. The other expert, Anatoly Golitsyn, the source of this information, has been living in the United States in hiding under an assumed identity since 1960 to protect himself from murder by the Soviet KGB. Our guest today is editor of the London-based periodical Soviet Analyst and editor of Golitsyn's second book, just published in the spring of 1995, The Perestroika Deception. I want to welcome Christopher Story to the McElhaney Report.
Delighted to be here.
Very happy to have you, sir. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with this subject, we must start at the beginning. Anatoly Golitsyn, this is one of maybe one or two existing public photographs of him, probably taken 30 years ago.
Who is too much involved in introspective meditation. You see, if you carefully look what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is teaching to Americans, is that most of the problems, most of the burning issues of today can be solved simply by meditating. Don't rock the boat. Don't get involved. Just sit down, look at your navel, and meditate. And the things, due to some strange logic, due to cosmic vibration, will settle down by themselves. This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda wants from Americans, to distract their opinion, attention, and mental energy from real issues of the United States into a non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony. Obviously, it's more beneficial for the Soviet aggressors to have a bunch of duped Americans than Americans who are self-conscious, healthy, physically fit, and alert to the reality.
Who is Anatoly Golitsyn, and what did he reveal when he defected from the Soviet KGB in 1960?
Golitsyn is the most important defector ever to have reached the West. He came out actually in 1961. He fled to Finland in 1961 with his family, and he revealed the existence of a long-range strategy of deception based on Leninist principles. And his importance is that all defectors who've come since him appear to have been engaged in an attempt to refute what he says. So we look to Golitsyn as the source of proper insights into what the communists are really up to.
And he predicted, did he not, that the KGB would send false defectors deliberately to discredit him?
That's correct, and this happened almost immediately afterwards, within 6 months. several defectors,
Now,
both from the KGB and from the military
the
intelligence.
Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion. What do they mean by it?
What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
What Golitsyn taught and revealed was that all Soviet governments are Leninist governments. They're driven by the deception strategy perfected by Lenin, which is aimed at achieving a long-range strategy, namely control of the
It's
whole
a
world.
great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of
What
American
happened was that,
students.
according to Golitsyn, is that after the death of Stalin, the communists realized, in general, that the method of control that they'd been adopting, namely brutal repression, was an inefficient method of achieving control over populations, and that it was more efficient to seek to achieve control through infiltration and deception, and through the control of the minds of
The
the
result?
target.
The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior.
So between 1959 and 1961, Shelepin developed, perfected, and agreed with the party the full outline of this deception plan. And the deception plan is basically a means of projecting communism into the whole of the rest of the world. And they do it through deception, and we can examine
The
how
process
this is done.
of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and
Yes.
who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents.
Yes.
Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. In future Marxist-Leninist America.
Lenin's methodology involves the use of the dialectic. Now, the Western mind, which is a civilized, developed mind, does not understand dialectical deception, which is basically a Mongol concept. And the fake Russia-China split is a good example. By creating the false impression that there was a split, which incidentally they've continued ever since, because now we have communist China and supposedly non-communist Russia, so the illusion of the split continues.
That's right.
The West was lulled into believing that if it supported China, it would be taking precautionary action against Russia.
Yes.
In fact, what's happening, and is continuing, They are both working together,
Yes.
and their intentions ultimately are hostile. They are aggressively oriented
The
towards the West.
demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards.
The long-range strategy is what it says. It's a long-range strategy. It took years to come to fruition. There are a number of reasons for this. They had to allow, for example, those with memories of the Stalin repressions to die off.
Mm-hmm.
They had to ensure that the true opposition no longer existed, and they have liquidated all true opposition in all East European
communist countries.
We also had the little phone man in the backyard during all of this that I didn't report on. We had a very large security fence around our home that was padlocked from the inside. You could not get in from the outside without internal admission being given to you. And I came home from teaching one day and found a little Oriental man in a phone uniform in my backyard messing with the telephone box. And I could not figure how he got into the backyard, and I was very disturbed. And what are you doing here? And he was very smiley and very sweet and said, oh, we're just replacing all the phone lines on this block. That's all. Don't worry about it. Go about your business. I checked with all of my neighbors, and nobody else had a phone man in their backyard.